Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the IRSM Southwest webinar this afternoon on understanding Martyn's Law, preparing for the Terrorism Protection of Premises Act 2025. I'm pleased to welcome Jodie, Jodie Reed, and who's been working in the world of compliance and consultancy and training for 25 years. She's part of the Protect Alliance UK, and she does host regular free webinars. And I'm not going to steal all of Jodie's thunder, as I'm sure she'll do an introduction for herself. So the intention is that Jodie's going to do a presentation on Martyn's Law and what that means for us. And it's a two-part session this afternoon. So the first part is Jodie doing a bit of a background to Martyn's Law, what that means for us. For those that have venues and other such places, public places, I suppose is the right description. And then we would do a bit of a Q&A session with Jodie and her expert knowledge on the subject, and just have those discussion points. And like many, I mean, I don't work in a public space. My organisation is private. This is of interest to myself, though, on a personal level, because as one of my things that I do for the organisation I work for is look after the security function. So although Martyn's Law doesn't apply to my organisation, having that understanding and how potentially Martyn's Law could be applied in the space that I work into, and then entering into the spirit of Martyn's Law is of interest. So without further ado, Jodie, I shall hand over to you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thank you for that warm welcome. As Simon's already mentioned, today we're looking at understanding Martyn's Law and preparing for the Terrorism Protection of Premises Act 2025. And there was a bit of an agenda that you've signed up for, so I've endeavoured to make sure that my presentation reflects that. I understand I've got about 20 minutes of talking before we go into some more of the Q&As. So I'm going to just quickly introduce you to who I am and hopefully establish some credibility in this space. We'll look at some of the key points from Martyn's Law, and including understanding the origins and the purpose of the legislation. We'll look at some of the key differences between the tiers. And I've been asked to talk a little bit about the legal duties, enforcement and implications for non-compliance. Although, spoiler alert, we don't know what all of that looks like yet, and I'll tell you why when I get to that part. But hopefully I will be sharing as well some practical steps for readiness during the implementation period, which has already started. A big part of today is going to be about questions and answers, so please do feel free to use the chat at the bottom of your screen if you want to pop anything in there. So just the bit on the credibility side. My name is Jodie Reed. I'm the Managing Director of a company called Penarth Management, and I've been working in the world of compliance for the past 25 years, which makes me sound positively ancient. But typically what my background has been in is compliance software consultancy and training, typically working around internationally recognised standards. And there on that list you can see things like quality, environment, and of particular relevance from a Martyn's Law perspective, health and safety, information security and business continuity. And it was actually armed with that knowledge that when I first read the Manchester Public Inquiry quite some years ago now, I actually realised that there was a gap in terms of some of the basics. If some of the basic stuff had been done right, things would be different. So that's when I formed the Protect Alliance UK. And as Simon's already said, one of the things that we do is deliver monthly free webinars. So for anybody that wishes to connect with me, my LinkedIn profile is on the screen. That now is enough about me. Back now to the main event. And we're going back in time to a place known as Manchester Arena. You may recall it was the 22nd of May 2017, so 8 years ago. And there was an Ariana Grande concert frequented by about 14,000 people. And they were having a great time until at 22:31, a lone attacker detonated a bomb, killing outright 22 people. And we always talk about those 22 people, but obviously there were many more who suffered life-changing injuries and others who've been traumatised by that event. Fast forward, there's quite a lot of stuff in between, but we've only got a short amount of time. So fast forward to this year, and finally on the 3rd of April, a new piece of legislation was enacted. And this came about because Vegan Murray, the mother of Martyn, one of the 22 people who died, recognised the need for greater safety and security at places that are that attract large crowds. So I'm going to move on through now, and what you'll find is I'd had received a few questions in advance. And so the ones that I'd received in advance, I've embedded into the storytelling for today to try and answer this in the right way. And the first question I had is, are large businesses in scope for Martyn's Law? And the honest answer is, it depends on what that large business is. And to put that into context, we're going to start by understanding parts of the legislation itself. I'm going to start by taking a look at Part 1, Public Protection Requirements. And the first part we need to understand there is standard and enhanced duty premises. Now, for those premises that are below 200 people, there are no additional legal requirements. But that does not mean to say that those organisations shouldn't be doing something different. At Manchester, there was existing health and safety legislation in place. There were existing requirements in terms of monitoring with CCTV. Those were not adhered to. And Protect UK have recently published a Mythbuster guide, and I think myth number 2 is around, oh, I'm out of scope, so it doesn't apply. And it does actually bust that myth by saying it's still good practice to look at introducing additional requirements. But if that venue has more than 200 people, but less than 800, then that venue will be in scope, and that will be classed as a standard duty premises. And we'll look at what that involves shortly. And over 800, there will be additional requirements again, and those will be enhanced duty premises. But no, it does not apply to every single large organisation. It only applies to those premises that are in scope for Schedule 1. We'll take a look at those now. And we're going to look at them in the order they are listed in the legislation. So first up, we have shops, etc. That's what it says, shops, etc. Now that's going to include obviously something like a shopping mall. Here we've got lots of organisations, and I should have mentioned as well that this can include, you might have a shop that's got 200 people, that's got a capacity of over 200 people, inside a mall that's got a capacity of over 800 people, and that they could potentially be premises in their own right. And we'll come on to more of that later. But it also includes some of the less obvious retail spaces, things like garden centres, which, let's face it, at this time of year with Father Christmas in town, they might be getting quite busy. Then we've got food and drink establishments. This only applies to those where you're eating and drinking in, not to takeaway venues. We've got entertainment and leisure activities, and you'll notice there's been a change in this thinking over time. Previously there were 2 separate activities. Now this brings together, we've got a picture there of a theatre. It could include cinemas, it could include your nightclub, it could include a boxing match, and all sorts of things beyond. We've also got sports grounds. That's quite an obvious one. We've got libraries, museums, galleries, etc. And the titles I'm using match the titles that are in the actual Act. Halls, etc. Now, on the face of it, that's not very helpful. And I started off with a picture from a conference hall. But the more I've dived into this, think also of town halls, community halls, basically a hall that you can hire out for your own purposes. Then we've got visitor attractions. So I've got here, we've got there a picture of Blackpool Tower, but it could be zoos, um, it could be National Trust properties, it could be all sorts of visitor attractions. Hotels, etc. So this will also include hostels. It also includes holiday parks. Places of worship. Now, this is an interesting one because here, regardless of the size of the venue, this will be classed as standard tier. So even if they have over 800 people in the premises, it will still be classed as standard tier. I'll come on to that in a little while. Then we've got healthcare. So hospitals, for instance, will be in scope. Then we've got a couple of got stations, railway stations, and we've got aerodromes. Now, these will only be in scope if they're not already governed by something like the British Transport Police. Then it carries on, and we've got childcare, which, like places of worship, will only ever be classed as standard tier. So too will be the primary and secondary education, i.e. the schools. Then we've got further education, so our colleges, they will also be treated as standard tier. And I'm less convinced that a college is such a good idea to keep a standard tier, but it is. Whereas universities, if they have more than 800 people, will be enhanced. And finally, we've got public authorities, and I believe that's a picture of a town hall in the northwest. So what you haven't seen is big industry. There's no factories. There's no serviced office environments, for instance. So going back to the question that we put at the start of this, no, it doesn't necessarily include all large premises. Next up, we've got another question. How does Martyn's Law apply to functions such as weddings, fireworks displays, food fairs, etc., locally organised one-off events? Great question, and there's a few things that we need to look at. Firstly, a wedding in itself would not be in scope. However, the premises where the wedding takes place might be. So I'm assuming that this is some kind of hotel in the picture here. If that hotel falls into scope with over 200 or over 800, then the premises themselves will be in scope. The wedding would not. Fireworks displays, that may or may not be in scope. There are some interesting exceptions. So remember I said that there are certain venues that will only be classed as standard tier? They will stay as standard tier. So even if a local school does a fireworks display and has, maybe they've only got, they can normally only accommodate 200 people or 250 people, but they do a big fireworks display and they put that on, over 1,000 people attending, it still wouldn't be in scope because of some interesting exceptions. So you do need to understand premises, which premises are in scope first. And you'll notice that we haven't yet got to events. And that's kind of, I think of this as being a game of top trumps, where premises trump events. If your premises are in scope, that takes priority. Food fairs. Now, that's an interesting one. It depends again on where you're doing it. I can remember doing many food fairs at Caldecott Castle, where you've got a space that can be, where you can manage the access. That one would potentially have been in scope, but again, potentially under the castle itself. But if it's a food fair that's on an open street where you can't manage the access, it may not be in scope. Let's take a look then at understanding qualifying events. So qualifying events only apply to events where you've got a capacity of over 800 people. And those people include the staff working the event as well. And it must consist of a building, other land, or a building and other land. So think, for instance, of a public house and its beer garden. That could potentially be a qualifying premise. That if it's if it's standard tier ordinarily, but again has one of these big fireworks displays, it could then become a qualifying event. And the premises are not enhanced duty premises. So remember I said that it's a game of top trumps. If you've got an enhanced qualifying premises, then you cannot have a qualifying event there. It doesn't happen. So qualifying events will only be taking place at venues that are not enhanced duty premises. And members of the public will have access to the premises for the purposes of attending the event. And it's reasonable to expect that more than 800 people may be present in connection with the event. E will expand on in the next slide as well. E looks at measures to be in place to secure or check members of the public who wish to access the event. Now, I suspect where we're waiting for additional guidance from the SIA, my suspicion is this is one of those points that will get clarified. You'll see why in just a moment. And as I've already mentioned, basically the same list of premises that only stay as standard tier regardless of size. So namely the place of worship, childcare, schools and colleges can also not have qualifying events. I said that we'd dive a bit deeper into part E. And this is the wording from the Act itself. And a word of caution, there is a really useful fact sheet, and it introduces some ambiguity because it talks about measures in place to secure or check members of the public who wish to access the premises for the purposes of attending the event. The Act says have paid to do so. The fact sheet confirms it can also apply to free events. So personally, I don't think that Part I should remain, and I suspect that's something that's going to attract additional guidance in the future. And actually, if you think about it, if it's a free event and people haven't paid for additional security or additional controls, is it not arguably a more vulnerable event? So although it says in the Act have paid to do so, the government fact sheet that's already available in the public domain confirms it does extend to free events as well. But they also have to have tickets or passes allowing access or be members or guests of a club, association or similar body. So the important point to take from this is there must be some form of access control. And that's why there are certain events that you would expect to be in scope that actually they're not. So things like some of the Christmas markets, we saw an attack in Germany last Christmas. We saw something in New Orleans not long afterwards. We saw it's been back in the news again in the last few weeks, where an individual drove into crowds at the Liverpool celebrations. Those events would not have been in scope because you cannot manage the access. So some interesting things to be mindful of. Okay, so we've talked about premises, we've talked about events. That leads us quite nicely on to the third question I had. Under Martyn's Law, who is the competent person and what does that look like? Again, that's an interesting one because the language within the legislation is different to language that you'll hear elsewhere. Within the Act itself, it talks about responsible persons or persons responsible for qualifying premises or events. So what that looks like is the person responsible for the premises is somebody who has control of the premises in connection with their Schedule 1 use. You see now why we started with the premises. Or the person responsible for qualifying events might also be that same person, somebody who has control of the premises at which the event is to be held. Again, I suspect we're going to get additional guidance on that. But this could be the responsible person isn't necessarily always going to be an individual person. It could be a corporate organisation. So, for instance, the university, a university might be considered the responsible person. Now, where you don't have an individual as the responsible person, you will have to have, according to the Act, a designated senior individual. And it is important that that is somebody with a senior level of management. Again, I suspect there will be much more guidance on that. But I said that there's some differences in the language. So the question was already about the competent person. And I've actually been liaising with SFJ Awards, who are in the process of finalising the new upcoming competent person in the workplace certificate. The developing organisation for that is actually NACTO itself, the National Counterterrorism Security Office. There is an expectation that that qualification will be launched probably around about March time next year. But there will be an additional new qualification. They have confirmed that whilst it won't be written into the legislation, it would be advisable for people to think about attending that qualification. I don't have all the details of what that qualification looks like yet, but my understanding, based on where we are today, is that it will be a 5-day qualification, that it will be it will take 5 days of classroom style, although it appears that that may be more flexible now, and possibly with live tuition via online, which makes it more flexible. But that's very new news. But it will lead to a level 3 qualification. I don't know much more than that at the moment, but I have actually invited SFJ to attend some of our own webinars next year. But there are things that people can already be working on. So I was asked to summarise some of the key differences. So I've done it this way: things that can be prepared now. Essentially, we've got the different levels. We've got the standard, the enhanced, and the events. Well, the enhanced and the events are going to be looking very much the same. You'll see that everybody has to have public protection measures. If you need me to, I can go into more detail about what those are with supporting information. But essentially, those organisations will need to have lockdown, they'll need to have evacuation, they'll need to have evacuation, and they will have to have communication strategies. Everybody, regardless of whether they are standard tier, enhanced tier, or running an event, will have to have those. And everybody will have to have the coordination and cooperation. So remember, I mentioned things like the shopping malls. If you've got in that building, you've got a big shopping mall coordinating potentially multiple different individual organisations. There's going to have to be a degree of communication and cooperation. Or just a few days ago, I was talking to a town council. It has a big building that includes the town hall premises. It includes a cinema that they're not responsible for. The cinema may or may not be in scope. It was about 200 capacity, so they weren't quite sure. But that cinema shares an entranceway with that town hall premise that is in scope in its own right. So even there, whether the cinema is in scope or not, they need to be communicating and coordinating and having that strategy with that organisation. And the other thing that people can be preparing now, if people know that there must be a designated senior individual, it makes sense to start thinking about who in the organisation is the logical person for that to be, and possibly start thinking about any upskilling you can already be doing. Then the enhanced tier and the events. There's a couple of extra things that come into being. Organisations will also have to have measures. Now, above and beyond the public protection procedures, there will need to be deeper levels of risk assessment. There will need to be much more monitoring, so perhaps things like CCTV. There will need to be things like managing information security. And there needs to be making sure that you've documented all of these plans, um, and making sure these things are working. But again, as I said at a recent talk just a few days ago, I would, although it's not a legal requirement under Martyn's law, I would also urge those people under the standard tier to be documenting their decisions and their rationale now. An old boss of mine used to say, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. And I think one of the things that people can be doing is capturing whether they are in scope, if they are, why they think they are, because even things like understanding the numbers, there's actually a whole fact sheet dedicated to how you calculate your numbers, and there's multiple different ways that you can do it. It could be by fire risk assessment capacity, it could be by ticket numbers, it could be by various other different means. Can't cover it all now because it actually took an entire dedicated webinar to do just that. But there is a fact sheet, and I can signpost people to that if they're interested. What I can tell you is that we now know who the regulator is going to be. That will be the Security Industry Authority. And we know that people will need to notify qualifying premises or events. We know that those notifications will need to be within a required time. Can't tell you what, because that hasn't been published. It will need to include specified information. Can't tell you that either, because we're waiting on the guidance. Be in a specified form. Don't know what that's going to look like. I would expect in this day and age for it to be submitted electronically, but I don't know. And be made in a specified manner. Again, until the guidance comes out, I don't know what that looks like. But what I do know is that only this morning I saw a post from the SIA on LinkedIn indicating that they're working on that. And so I would hope to see some additional guidance coming out in the new year. I see the role of the regulator as being twofold, and they have confirmed that in the first instance, their main role will be that of support and guidance. But later on, there will be more investigation and enforcement as well. So in terms of the guidance, are legally required to provide guidance, and that's what they're in the process of developing. They will need to provide advice about the requirements. And actually, the more people I talk to, the more I realise that there are some bits that that will require clarification. And a really good example I stumbled across when preparing for a separate webinar is you think that your Schedule 1 use will be really obvious. You know what you are. I was actually doing a talk on fire safety, and I remember the York Minster fire many years ago. Probably submitted something under Blue Peter trying to get some brownie points. Didn't win anything. I do remember that. But York Minster, you think of it as being a place of worship. Or is it a tourist attraction? Because when you look at the footfall, arguably, does it get more people through its doors because they're visiting it as a tourist attraction than as a place of worship? So when I say I anticipate further guidance about what those requirements are and how to interpret things, that possibly includes things that seem really obvious when you first look at it. And so one of the things they're going to have to do as well is keep under review the effectiveness of the requirements with the overall aim of reducing risk of harm to individuals arising from acts of terrorism and the vulnerability of enhanced duty premises and qualifying events to acts of terrorism. So we know that bit and that we're waiting for guidance. What I can't say so much about at the moment is the role of the regulator as an enforcer. We know that they will have investigatory powers for the purposes of assessing compliance with requirements, and we know that they'll have the ability to take enforcement action. We know that they'll have the ability to issue enforcement notices, compliance notices, restriction notices, penalty notices, and financial penalties. Quite what that looks like in practice, I don't know. And what I would love to do is to invite the SIA to come and talk to us when that information has got more clarity. But I suspect they're concentrating quite rightly on the what do people need to be doing, how can we support you first before getting things out and beating people with. So I didn't have any more questions. So we've spent most of our time on part one. Parts two and three are very quick and easy to cover. So I've left those in. Essentially, plans of premises are going to be amended, or the requirement for these is amended under the Licensing Act of 2003 and the Licensing Scotland Act of 2005. Essentially, in very simple terms, anybody applying for a new alcohol license is going to need to submit two versions of a plan. Oops, sorry. They're going to need to submit two versions of a plan. One will be a detailed plan for the purposes of the local authority. And another less detailed one will need to be submitted for public use. Then part three is even shorter. It talks about, so the short title is the Terrorism Protection of Premises Act. The commencement date is going to be not earlier than the 3rd of April 2027. So that will make it exactly 2 years after it was enacted. That's what I know Fegan Murray is hoping for, but there's some debate as to whether the organisations are on target for that. The extent it basically applies to England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales as well. So we've got that. So I'm hoping that I've stuck more or less to 20 minutes to look at why it's been introduced, what the law requires, when it will be enforceable, and some of the actions that organisations can be doing to prepare already. So with that in mind, Simon, did you have? I can see that there's some bits of stuff going on in the chat. What have we got?
There is. Thank you, Jodie. Yeah, I'm really interesting. So yeah, we have got a few questions that have come up in the chat. Some really good ones as well. So first one is from Ian Smith, who I believe has had to jump off the call. So if we are able to email him or catch up with him at some later stage just to let him know what your answer is. But his question is, it says, I am a risk manager at a large college with 4,000 students, a mix of higher and further education. Which scope do we land in? And this is the question. This is his real quick. I've had mixed answers on previous webinars.
Oh, okay. Well, a college. So if that's that to me is very definite. That is standard tier with and it's one of those odd ones that's got the exemption against it. Now, I said I'd come back onto some of those exemptions. There's an argument that says that places of worship, childcare, schools and colleges already have certain levels of control in place, and that's why they were exempt. For me, colleges are the odd. They're the one that makes the least sense out of that, because we've all seen too many instances of knife crime arising in those kind of venues. But a college will be standard tier. It will have exemptions attached to it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jodie. So the next question was from Ben. If the venue is within the scope and there is a free to enter ticket less event, would it fall under the event additional layer of requirements?
Can you repeat that for me again, please, Simon?
Yeah, if the venue is within the scope
Yeah.
and there is a free to enter ticketless event, sorry, so would it fall under the event additional layer of requirements?
No. So if the not necessarily. So if the venue is a standard tier already, then if if the number of people attending is less than 800, that doesn't change anything.
Okay.
If it's a standard tier premises that has organised a special one-off event, we had the example of fireworks before, then it may be in scope. But we then have to make sure that we've got those access controls. That seems to be the really defining point about what makes that in scope. And I think that's where we'll have to have more guidance on that. So calculating numbers will be a really important part of this, because the something else that the calculating numbers fact sheet talks about is if you've got premises or an event where you expect to have, say, let's say 1,000 people over the course of the day, but because you're managing the flow through there, perhaps you've only got a maximum of 250 people on the premises at any given point in time. Then that would be the maximum number of people that you'd be looking at.
Okay, thank you for that, Jodie. There was another question around a copy of the slides, but Julie's the recording will be uploaded onto the IRSM member resource hub for members and be able to refer back to. I've got some more questions here. I mean, I think some of them we're going to have to wait for the guidance of you, but I think how will inspections be conducted, and what should organisations expect during an inspection?
That I definitely can't answer at the moment, and I would expect there to be guidance on what that looks like. I'm not even entirely sure that will be clear by the time we go into the enforceable stage, because in the first instance there's very much if anybody wants to take a look on LinkedIn later and see the latest post from the SIA, there's actually they're actually advertising at the moment for somebody to be the assistant or deputy director from a Martyn's Law perspective, and it talks about their role being primarily that supporting function in the first instance.
Okay. So, what in your sort of experience, Jodie, what training is recommended for frontline staff and temporary workers under Martyn's Law?
Okay. Well, oddly, the word training doesn't actually appear anywhere within the legislation itself. For me, that's one of those missed opportunities. However, the words risk assessment and the introduction of protective measures, those do come in. And obviously, if you're doing a risk assessment, it's going to lead you to the outcome of training. In terms of what training is recommended, there is already some really good free training available online. It's called ACT, Action Counters Terrorism, and there's different types of module available. So that's completely free. All it's going to cost a company is the time for their employees to sit it. And I'd say each of those sessions probably takes about 45 minutes, but it's good, it's free, it's very relatable. Then I mentioned that there is going to be an accredited level 3 qualification, the Competent Person in the Workplace scheme. And again, I asked the question in prep because I'd had that question in advance. I did put that to the awarding body, and they have confirmed that whilst it won't be a legal requirement, it would certainly be advisable for people to be looking at doing that.
Okay, that's good, really good. I suppose that really brings me on to my next question. Are there any hidden costs or operational challenges businesses should anticipate beyond staff time to do all the paperwork and things that are required?
There is actually some cost analysis in all of the government guidance, and when I first saw it, I thought that's low. That's not going to cover everything. And then I took a step back and I thought the whole reason I started with the Protect Alliance in the first place is because I thought, but it's not the cost is going to come because people already aren't doing what they should be doing. So for me, the cost is going to come more from implementing things that should already be in place now. And I'll give you an example of something that happened on quite ironically a real live event. The night before I was preparing for one of my Martyn's Law talks about a year ago, I was eating out at a restaurant in Cardiff with a couple of colleagues, and the young server came up to us, approached us quite calmly actually, but I'm sorry, you can't leave through the door that you came in through. There's a suspected acid attack outside. Now, that was all calm and professional and really good. What was not so good was what she said next. She'd only just learnt where the emergency exit was. she'd only just learned, she'd been working there for 7 weeks already. And she only found that out because there was actually an emergency scenario unfolding outside. That should already have been part of her induction training. That's just a breakdown of existing measures. So for me, the cost is going the costs for organisations are going to come more from implementing the things they should already be doing than from the additional measures. So, like I say, initially when I first read the government documents and the level of expenditure that was attached on an annual basis, I didn't think it was going to be enough until I stopped and thought about it and thought, no, actually, the lion's share of what Martyn's Law describes is largely good practice. A lot of it is common sense. Yes, there is more emphasis on the terrorism side of things, but for me, a lot of this, if people have got good emergency procedures and plans in place already, and they practice them, because that's something that people are really poor at. They might be quite good at writing them, but they're not testing them. If they're already good at doing things like that, then the muscle memory starts to kick in, and that's what's going to keep you safe in the event of an emergency. Because let's face it, if you hear a fire alarm or a real emergency unfolds, it never goes according to the script anyway. So you have to rely on that muscle memory.
Thanks, Jodie. I would agree with what you just said there about emergency processes as well. If you have already that in place and they're good, then really Martyn's Law is just an extension of that, and you know, adding it around that. This is an interesting one. How can organisations avoid being misled by third-party vendors claiming their products are necessary for compliance?
Oh, now that's a bigger challenge, and it's one that has concerned the government all the way through the development of this. It's one of the reasons that we've been keeping our sessions completely free, because we believe that there is information that people need to understand. We are, if it's of interest, we are looking at introducing some additional webinars, looking at unintended consequences, which was another phrase bandied about the Houses of Parliament as this thing was progressing. So unintended consequences could be people rushing ahead and not just talking to the wrong vendors, but potentially specifying changes without understanding the full consequences. So that one thing I would urge is caution over: is somebody experienced in that line of work? So not only have I now been talking for Martyn's Law for a number of years, since before it even came through, but like I say, I've been working in the world of compliance for the past 25 years. So that's where I like to establish some credibility. And I mention that more because I can remember when GDPR was a thing. So think back to 2018. Somebody attended one of our training sessions. In fact, I personally signed his certificate of attendance. He'd attended a 1.5, 2 hour session. Next thing, I saw the same individual on LinkedIn claiming to be a certificated GDPR practitioner. I signed his certificate. That, to me, does not make for somebody who has... this individual had a background in marketing, nothing to do with compliance. So there will be things like that you can check for. It is something that we do intend to keep running our own webinars and trying to educate people on some of the potential pitfalls. I know that there are certain associations that you will see more and more of, and I expect the additional guidance to share details of that. Yeah, it's a tough one, but experience tells me, unfortunately, there will be people doing it, and it's one of the reasons why, from the moment I read the public inquiry and I realised how important this was, how important it was to handle it sensitively. For me, this wasn't about. Yes, there will be opportunities. People will need certain services, and some people will want consultancy. They might want software, but in the first instance, about educating them what they need, and then they can buy what is needed with the right level of support. But yeah, it is a challenge, and it's one that concerns people. it would be interesting to see if the SIA come out with their own tips on what to watch out for as well.
Yeah, that's a good point because they already do the approved contractor scheme, don't they? For with where you make with insecurity. So there is,
Yes.
yeah. So whether they'll extend it to that, that's a good point. I've got a couple more questions. First one: what happens if a one-off event meets the qualifying criteria but takes place in a venue that is normally out of scope?
Then that could potentially be in scope. So if it's oh, I don't know. If it's, say it's a town council running it and they happen to have their town hall and I don't know if many town councils have playing grounds outside, but let's imagine they're going to be doing that and they've got a fireworks display and their grounds are inside an enclosed park area. Ordinarily, they might only have I don't know, say 500 people in scope. That would make them standard tier. If if that event takes them to expect over 800 people, then yes, that premises for the purposes of the event would be in scope. So again, we need to see the documentation in terms of what does that look like. But my expectation is that if a qualifying event is held at a standard tier premises, then yes, that event will need to be notified in its own right.
Okay. And then my sort of the last one I've got in front of me here is: will there be any phased compliance requirements before the act comes fully into force? So I know that we got this sort of two-year window, if you like, but is there gonna be any phased compliance requirements?
Um, there is no mention of phased requirements. And for me, one of the reasons I've started talking about this so long ago is because I've seen time and time again that if there's a piece of legislation that's changing, I can remember halon being eradicated from fire systems years ago, or R22 from air conditioning. Far too many people sit back and wait for these things to have gone past before they start doing anything. And that's why I'm trying to educate people that the best time, if you haven't already done it, the best time to start is now. Right now, you're not going to be penalised if you haven't got in your protective measures. You're not going to be penalised if you haven't got those if the CCTV isn't in the right format for what you actually need. But you should already be thinking about it. You should be planning, looking at your risks, and indeed starting to budget for it because, as we've already talked about, there may be some costs, but there's a fair chance if you need CCTV, you should already be paying for that anyway.
Yeah, thank you, Jodie. That was all the questions I had in front of me, but I don't think we've got anything else in the chat. So I think we're pretty much there. And unless anybody's got any last minute questions they would like to ask Jodie while she's here, we've got a few minutes. We can make use of the time if anybody has got any last questions. Or Jodie, perhaps what are your closing thoughts before we leave?
Not so much closing thoughts, but I've got details of our next upcoming event. If anybody has more questions to put to us, I will be joined on the 18th of December by a number of our regular speakers, and we'll be taking more questions at that stage. And then to be finalised, in terms of me sharing the events with all of the participants, but the dates are confirmed. We've got some upcoming webinars. The 15th of January, we'll be talking about compliance, and I'm hoping to be joined. It won't just be myself. I'm hoping to be joined then by somebody from the world of certification and somebody from a cyber essentials perspective. On the 19th of February, I'll be joined by SFJ looking at competent person in the workplace. That's so hot off the press, that was confirmed only this morning. And on the 27th of February, there will be a number of us participating in the latest Protect Zone in person at Fareham Expo. Full details of those will be on the Protect Alliance website in due course, and people can find us via these contact details. But other than that, no, that's me done, unless there are any more questions.
Yeah, we have had one more question come in from Ben. If there are regular events of over 800, will each event have to be notified to the SIA?
Um, if there's regular events, that makes me question whether or not there's actually going to be, if the premises might be enhanced here in their own right. If the premises are enhanced here, then no, because the premises trump events. Um, if it's not a qualifying premises, then my at this point in time, without the guidance, I believe so. But I think this is where there's going to be, we're going to find there are some things that nobody can really think about until they start to get inundated by all these different variations, and all the different requests.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jodie. That looks like that was the last question. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. It's been really, really interesting, and I know just this hour session is certainly improved my knowledge around Martyn's Law, and it was very kind of you to join us this afternoon. So, Jodie, thank you very much. Hope to catch you on another one soon, and
Thank
thank
you.
you all for joining us today. Speak to you all soon and see you all soon, hopefully. Bye bye now.
Thanks. Okay, bye.